Introduction: The Weaver Who Rewrote History. Imagine walking into a grand palace in 18th century France, where sunlight spills through tall windows, illuminating luxurious silk drapes embroidered with intricate patterns. Every thread shimmers in gold and silver, forming mesmerizing floral designs, mythical creatures, and elaborate scenes of royal life. These fabrics, brocades, damasks, and tapestries are so breathtakingly detailed that they seem to tell stories of their own. Now, imagine the hands that created them. Weavers, men, women, and even children sit hunched over looms for endless hours, guiding each thread by hand. For every inch of fabric, they repeat thousands of precise movements, their fingers raw and their eyes strained by candlelight. The most intricate designs take months, sometimes years to complete. This is not just work, it is an art form, a tradition passed down for centuries, but it is also a life of hardship, exhaustion, and poverty. For generations, weaving has been a labor of patience and precision, an industry ruled by guilds, protected by tradition, and resistant to change. The weavers of cities like Lyon, France are both artisans and prisoners of their craft. They take pride in their skill, yet they are bound to a grueling life of toil. Their hands shape the wealth of France's nobility, yet they remain poor, struggling to feed their families. But in this world of silk and suffering, a single man, Joseph Marie Jacquard, dared to challenge the impossible. The birth of an innovator. Born into a family of silk weavers in 1752, Jacquard knew from childhood what it meant to be trapped by the loom. His father, a skilled weaver, worked from dawn till dusk, battling the complexity of the trade. Each time a new order arrived, an elaborate design for an aristocrat's gown or a nobleman's chair covering, his father sighed, knowing it would take weeks, even months, of painstaking labor. From the moment Joseph was old enough to hold a shuttle, he was expected to follow in his father's footsteps. But unlike the other weavers' children, who learned by rote, Joseph asked why. Why did weaving take so long? Why did even the best artisans make errors that ruined entire bolts of fabric? Why was there no way to make the process faster, smoother, and less punishing? These questions would follow him throughout his life. But in 18th century France, change was dangerous. Innovation, especially in traditional trades, was not welcomed, it was feared. The weavers' guilds, powerful and deeply protective of their craft, had driven out inventors before. Machines were seen as a threat to livelihoods. To challenge the system was to invite ruin. Yet history does not remember those who stayed silent. A world on the brink of change. The France that Jacquard was born into was one of wealth and excess, but also deep inequality. While the nobility wrapped themselves in silk, the very people who made those fabrics struggled to afford bread. Revolution was brewing. The Industrial Revolution had already begun reshaping England, where machines were transforming the way goods were produced. In France, however, the weaving industry remained tied to the past, resisting mechanization at all costs. But Jacquard's mind worked differently. He saw the endless repetition in the weaving process, the way designs followed patterns, the way certain threads always moved in a predictable sequence. Could a machine do this? Could the movements of the loom be controlled automatically? What if a loom could weave fabric on its own, just as a music box played a tune by following the pattern of its pins? This idea was radical, unthinkable, and extremely dangerous. And yet, it would be the very idea that changed the world. a legacy that reaches beyond silk. Most inventors dream only of improving their own trade, but Joseph Marie Jacquard's loom would revolutionize more than just weaving. In the decades after his death, his greatest innovation, the punch card system that controlled his loom, would inspire some of history's greatest minds. Charles Babbage, the father of computing, studied Jacquard's invention and realized that machines could think by following programmed instructions. Over a century later, early computers would still use punch cards, directly tracing their origins back to a poor weaver's son from Lyon. From textile mills to modern computers, from the Industrial Revolution to the digital age, Jacquard's legacy proves a simple but powerful truth. One idea, no matter how impossible it seems, can reshape history. Chapter 1: The Weaver's Son. Lyon, France, 1752. The city of Lyon, known as the silk capital of France, is alive with sound, the rhythmic clatter of wooden looms, the shuffle of weary footsteps on cobbled streets, the murmur of voices negotiating prices in the market. This is not the Lyon of nobility, of grand palaces and lavish feasts. This is the Lyon of the silk workers, the artisans who spend their lives bent over intricate fabrics, weaving fortunes they will never possess. In one of the many cramped workshops that line the city's winding streets, a small boy watches his father work. Joseph Marie Jacquard is no more than 5, yet his world is already shaped by the loom. The air is thick with the scent of raw silk, and dust drifts through beams of light that filter through the narrow window. His father, Jean-Charles Jacquard, a skilled but struggling silk weaver, sits hunched before a massive contraption of wood and string, guiding each thread with the patience of a man who has known nothing else. Joseph leans closer, his small fingers tracing the patterns on the unfinished cloth. The fabric is beautiful, a delicate brocade, its design forming a garden of roses and vines in shimmering gold thread. But Joseph does not yet see its beauty. He sees something else. He sees his father's hands, red, calloused, swollen from years of pulling the heavy shuttle back and forth, from tying endless knots, from the strain of hours that stretch from before sunrise to long after dusk. He sees the deep furrows in his father's brow, the tightness in his shoulders, the silent exhaustion that weighs on him more than the loom itself. "This is our life, Joseph," his father says, his voice steady but tired. The loom provides, but it also enslaves. Joseph does not understand yet, but the words sink into him like seeds planted in deep soil. One day, they will grow into something greater than he can imagine. A life woven in hardship. The Jacquard family, like many in Lyon, lives in poverty. Silk weaving is a prestigious craft, but it is also a cruel one. The master weavers, the few who own large workshops, grow rich from commissions by nobles and merchants. But the small, independent weavers, like Joseph's father, barely scrape by. For every magnificent dress worn by a duchess, there are dozens of exhausted men, women, and children who have spent weeks laboring over the fabric, only to earn enough to survive, just barely. Jean-Charles Jacquard works from before dawn to midnight, his hands never resting, his eyes strained by the dim glow of an oil lamp. His wife, Antoinette Rive, helps where she can, spinning thread and managing the household. But the work is relentless, the pay barely enough to feed their children. Joseph's older brother dies young, a victim of the harsh life that claims so many in the lower classes. His parents mourn, but there is no time for grief. The loom does not stop for sorrow. Joseph grows up knowing hunger, knowing struggle, knowing the weight of expectations. But he also grows up with a mind that is different. A curious mind in a harsh world. Most children of weavers learn their craft without question. They watch, they repeat, they accept. Joseph does not. He watches, yes, but he asks. Why must the loom be so slow? Why must his father suffer for hours over a single row of stitches? Why do small mistakes ruin entire days of work? His father has no answers. He simply shakes his head and tells Joseph, this is how it has always been. But Joseph is not satisfied. Instead of playing in the streets like other boys, he studies the loom. He watches the way the threads interlace, the way the pedals move, the way his father's hands seem almost mechanical in their repetition. He begins to see patterns, not just in the fabric, but in the process itself. One evening, as his father steps away for a moment, Joseph does something daring. He climbs onto the wooden bench, his small fingers gripping the shuttle. Carefully, hesitantly, he presses one of the treadles with his foot, watching as the wooden heddles lift the warp threads. He pushes the shuttle across, once, twice. For a fleeting moment, he feels the loom respond to him. Then he makes a mistake. The shuttle snags, the thread snaps, and a section of the unfinished silk is ruined. His father rushes back, his face dark with anger. What have you done? Joseph flinches, expecting a blow, but his father only sighs, rubbing his temples. You cannot rush the loom, Joseph, he says, his voice weary. It takes time. Everything takes time. Joseph nods, but inside, a thought burns in his mind. Does it? A dream of something more. The years pass, and Joseph grows. By the time he is a teenager, he knows the loom as well as his father does. But unlike his father, he does not accept its flaws. He dreams of something better. A world where weaving is not suffering, where beauty does not require pain. A world where the loom is not a master, but a servant. But in Lyon, tradition is law. The silk weaving guilds hold absolute power, and they fear change more than anything. Innovation threatens their control. Those who try to improve the craft are often cast out, ruined, or worse. Joseph has ideas. But ideas, in this world, are dangerous. For now, he says nothing. But the seed has been planted. One day, it will grow. And when it does, it will shake the world to its core. Chapter 2: Struggles and Setbacks. The weight of loss. By the time Joseph Marie Jacquard is 10 years old, he has already known more sorrow than many endure in a lifetime. His childhood, once filled with the gentle sounds of his mother's voice and the steady, rhythmic hum of his father's loom, crumbles in an instant. First, his mother falls ill. There is no money for doctors, no remedies for the sickness that takes hold of her fragile body. She weakens, her once strong hands, so skilled in embroidering fine silk, becoming frail. Joseph watches helplessly as the woman who nurtured him fades away, her breath growing shallower with each passing night. One morning, she is gone. The workshop is eerily silent without her presence. The small, dimly lit home feels colder, emptier. Joseph's father, Jean-Charles Jacquard, is devastated. For years, the man has fought to keep his family afloat. Debt looms over them like a storm, an ever-present shadow. As a master weaver, he has skill, but skill does not change the fact that weaving is a brutal, backbreaking trade. Each intricate fabric, each delicate thread, takes countless hours of painstaking labor. The guilds take their share, the merchants take their profit, and the weavers are left with scraps. Jean-Charles was already struggling before his wife died. Her loss shatters him. Within a year, he, too, is gone, not from illness, but from exhaustion, from grief, from the crushing weight of life's burdens. And so, at 10 years old, Joseph is alone. An orphan with nothing but a loom. Orphaned, Joseph inherits nothing. No wealth. No security. No future. All that remains of his father's legacy is an old, worn loom, the very machine that dictated the rhythm of his family's life. But the loom is not a gift. It is a curse. The guilds expect him to take up his father's place. Weaving is not just a profession, it is an obligation. Children of weavers must become weavers. That is how it has always been. The loom is his only means of survival, but he looks at it with resentment. He has spent his childhood watching his father's hands tremble with exhaustion, his fingers raw from endless labor. He has seen the silk industry for what it truly is, a machine that grinds men into dust while only the rich grow prosperous. Joseph does not want that life. But what choice does he have? With nowhere to turn, he tries to do what is expected of him. He weaves. The loom creaks beneath his hands. His fingers stumble over the threads. He struggles, the rhythm never quite coming naturally to him. Each day, the same monotonous motion. The same repetitive process. The same relentless, soul-crushing work. Days turn into weeks. Weeks into months. And slowly, the reality sets in, this is all his life will ever be. Unless he dares to break free. A hunger for knowledge in a world that withholds it. Even as he weaves, Joseph's mind is restless. He watches the world around him with curiosity. He listens, observes, absorbs. He wants more. More than thread and fabric. More than the endless, thankless toil of the loom. He dreams of understanding, but knowledge is a privilege reserved for the elite. In 18th century France, education is a luxury. Only nobles, scholars, and the wealthy have access to books, to tutors, to learning. The son of a weaver? He is not meant to read, to study, to think. He is meant to work. But Joseph refuses to accept that. In the dead of night, when the city of Lyon sleeps, he teaches himself to read. He borrows books where he can, sneaking glimpses of texts whenever an opportunity arises. He learns from the world itself, listening to merchants talk about distant lands, watching craftsmen as they shape metal, studying the movements of gears and mechanisms whenever he passes by a clockmaker's shop. He questions everything. Why must weaving be so labor-intensive? Why must patterns be guided by hand? Why do other trades have machines to make their work easier, but weavers remain bound to centuries-old techniques? He does not yet have answers. But the questions take root in his mind, and they will never leave him. A life of odd jobs, a mind in motion. Joseph cannot escape weaving entirely, he needs it to survive, but he refuses to let it define him. So he begins taking on odd jobs. Anything that will teach him something new. Bookbinding. He learns the beauty of printed words, how knowledge is preserved and passed down. Metalworking. He discovers the power of forged tools, the precision of finely crafted instruments. Engraving tombstones. A morbid trade, but one that teaches him patience and precision, the same precision that, one day, will be needed for building complex machinery. Each job is a piece of a puzzle he does not yet realize he is assembling. At the time, these skills seem disconnected, nothing more than means of survival. But fate is at work. Every piece of knowledge he gains, every trade he masters, every skill he picks up along the way, all of it is shaping him into the man who will one day change the world. The spark of an idea. As the years pass, Joseph grows frustrated with the limitations of his world. He sees progress happening everywhere except in weaving. The printing press has revolutionized the spread of ideas. Engineering advancements are transforming how cities function. Mechanization is creeping into every industry, except his own. Why? One evening, he watches a paper mill in operation. He sees how machines guide the sheets of paper through rollers, how the process is repetitive but efficient, how human hands are only needed to oversee rather than to execute every step. And a thought begins to form in his mind. What if a loom could function the same way? What if patterns could be automated, the way printing presses automate text? What if the weaver did not need to control every single motion? The idea is vague, unformed, but it is there. A seed, planted deep in his thoughts, waiting to grow. He does not know it yet, but this idea will become his life's purpose. For now, though, it remains a dream, lingering at the edges of his mind. A dream he cannot afford to chase. Not yet. Because the world is changing. And soon, the revolution will begin, a storm that will tear France apart and test Joseph in ways he never imagined. Chapter 3: The Revolutionary's Dilemma. Lyon, 1789, a city in flames. The air in Lyon is thick with smoke and the scent of blood. The once proud city of silk, where artisans wove luxurious fabrics for the nobility, is now a battleground. The streets that once echoed with the rhythmic clatter of looms now ring with gunfire, shouts, and the cries of the condemned. The revolution has arrived, and with it, the old world is collapsing. The nobility, the merchants, even the master weavers who held power for centuries, none are safe. The great silk guilds that once dictated every aspect of a weaver's life shut their doors as their patrons are dragged to the guillotine. The palaces and mansions, where nobles once draped themselves in the finest Lyonese silk, are abandoned or looted. Factories close. The economy crumbles. The silk workers, the people Joseph Marie Jacquard was born among, should feel liberated. But instead, they are starving. The revolution may have promised equality, but it has not fed the weavers' children. Without nobles to buy silk, there is no work. Without work, there is no bread. Jacquard, now in his late 30s, watches the chaos unfold around him. Does he fight for survival, or does he chase the vision that has haunted him for years? The choice is not simple. A world in turmoil, a mind in motion. Jacquard is no stranger to hardship. His life has been one long battle against poverty, against tradition, against the limitations of the loom itself. But now, another force looms over him, the revolution, and the unpredictable tide of history. The streets are filled with anger and desperation. The revolutionaries claim to fight for the people, but among the workers, there is little sense of victory. Lyon becomes a stronghold of resistance, and in 1793, it is brutally besieged by the forces of the Republic. Tens of thousands are killed. Homes are burned. Anyone suspected of loyalty to the old order is executed. Joseph does not fight. He does not join the barricades or take up arms. He observes. And what he sees changes everything. The machines of war and progress. Amidst the chaos, a realization strikes him. The revolution, for all its horror, is driving technological change. New machines are being built, not for weaving, but for war. He sees military presses stamping metal parts with perfect precision, artillery mechanisms that reload with exact repetition, printing presses that reproduce words flawlessly. Machines that repeat movements with unerring accuracy. And suddenly, Jacquard's mind snaps into focus. What if weaving could work the same way? What if a loom could be programmed to follow a pattern, just as a printing press follows a layout of type? What if the weaver's hands did not need to manually lift each thread, did not need to suffer through endless hours of painstaking, error-prone labor? What if a loom could weave on its own? The idea takes hold of him with an intensity he cannot ignore. For years, he has dreamed of freeing the weavers from their suffering. Now, amidst the carnage of the revolution, he sees the path forward. But seeing it is one thing. Building it? That is another battle entirely. The first sketches of a revolution. One night, under the flickering glow of a single candle, Joseph sits at his small, makeshift desk. Outside, the streets of Lyon are restless. Drunken revolutionaries sing songs of liberty, distant gunshots crack through the air. But inside his modest home, there is only silence. And on the table before him, a single sheet of paper. Slowly, methodically, he begins to sketch. His pencil moves with certainty, guided by years of experience, by frustration, by the endless hours spent at his father's loom. He knows the loom better than he knows himself, its strengths, its weaknesses, its cruel inefficiencies. He does not need to think. He knows what must change. Lines become gears. Gears become levers. Levers become an entirely new machine. A loom that controls itself. A loom that follows a pattern without human hands guiding each thread. A loom that frees the weaver. His idea is simple yet revolutionary. What if punched cards could control the loom? Just as a music box plays a song by following the ridges on a metal drum, could a loom follow a coded pattern on a series of punched cards? Could fabric be programmed? He does not sleep that night. By dawn, the first concept of the Jacquard loom is born. The battle for creation. But an idea is not enough. To build it, he will need resources, time, and, most of all, support. But support is scarce in a world at war. France is no longer the France of his childhood. The monarchy is gone, the revolutionaries now rule with iron fists, and Lyon is still struggling to recover from the siege that nearly destroyed it. Money is non-existent. The few remaining silk workshops barely function, and the workers, desperate, starving, care only about surviving the next day. Who will listen to a man dreaming of a new kind of loom when there is no work, no silk, no market? And even if he could build it, there is another terrifying truth. The silk weaving guilds, which still hold some power, will never accept this machine. A machine that could replace human hands? A machine that could weave more silk in a week than a weaver could in a month. They will fight him. They will try to destroy him. But Jacquard is no longer a young boy watching his father's hands bleed. He has seen suffering. He has endured it. And he will not stop now. A dangerous path forward. With war still raging, with Lyon still recovering, Joseph Marie Jacquard stands at a crossroads. He could abandon his idea, return to a quiet life of weaving, accept his fate as just another silk worker, struggling to survive. Or he could take the greatest risk of his life, fight against tradition, against the guilds, against the entire system that has kept weavers in chains for centuries. He knows the dangers. But he also knows this. If he succeeds, he will change the world forever. And so, against all odds, against every force that seeks to stop him, Joseph chooses the fight. He will build his machine. Even if it costs him everything. Chapter 4: The Birth of an Idea. A restless mind in turmoil. The streets of Lyon are still in chaos. The French Revolution has shattered the old order, bringing death, destruction, and uncertainty. Once mighty nobles have fallen, guilds have been dismantled, and the weavers, already struggling before the war, now face total ruin. Joseph Marie Jacquard, now in his 40s, walks through the city, his mind heavy with thoughts. His world has been turned upside down. The revolutionaries spoke of liberty, equality, and fraternity, but where is freedom for the weavers, who still toil endlessly at their looms? Where is equality when only the rich can afford luxury fabrics while the workers starve? He sees men with bent backs, gnarled fingers, eyes dimmed from years of tedious work. He sees mothers sacrificing their eyesight, weaving in candlelight just to feed their children. He sees young boys, no older than he was when he first sat at a loom, trapped in the same fate as their fathers. Nothing has changed. And that is when he knows he must build something that will. The lessons of a lifetime. Joseph has spent his life learning. Bookbinding taught him how information is stored and retrieved. Metalworking taught him precision, structure, and mechanics. Engraving tombstones taught him the patience to carve intricate details into hard surfaces. All of these trades have given him pieces of a puzzle, but he has never been able to see the full picture. Until now. Machines have changed other industries. Why not weaving? The idea obsesses him. Weaving is not chaos, it is a pattern, a sequence, a repetition of motions. If a machine could control the movement of threads, then fabric could be woven without human hands guiding every step. But how? For weeks, he isolates himself in his workshop, sketching, erasing, reshaping his thoughts into something tangible. And then, the breakthrough comes. A music box and an old idea. One evening, as he wanders through a market, Joseph stops to listen to the delicate chime of a music box. A small girl turns the crank, and the tiny metal pins inside pluck a series of notes. A preset melody, repeating flawlessly. Something stirs in his mind. The music box does not play at random. Its melody is programmed, fixed in place by the position of the pins on the rotating drum. He buys the music box and takes it apart, studying the mechanism. And suddenly, he remembers something else. Years ago, before the revolution, he had heard of an old invention by Joseph Marie, a man who had once attempted to automate the loom. Marie's system used a strip of perforated paper that could guide the loom, lifting and lowering threads without a weaver's direct control. The idea had failed. It was too crude, too limited. But what if? What if instead of a simple strip of perforated paper, a series of cards could be used, each card encoding a part of the design, like notes in a melody? The loom would read the cards the way a music box reads its metal pins, determining which threads to lift and which to lower. With this, patterns could be woven automatically, endlessly repeating without human effort. Joseph's hands tremble as he sketches furiously. This is it. This is the answer. A loom that thinks for itself. Building the impossible. The challenge now is not just to design the system, but to build it. Joseph has no wealth, no patron to fund him, no guild to support his work. He is an outsider, a man working against the traditions of his own trade. But he does not stop. He takes apart old looms, salvaging gears, pulleys, and wooden frames. He experiments with punch card designs, testing how different arrangements of holes affect the threads. Each failure only fuels his determination. He builds, dismantles, rebuilds. Day and night, he refines the mechanism, testing different materials, adjusting the card feed system, making sure the loom does not jam when reading the cards. At last, after months of relentless work, the first true Jacquard loom is born. Joseph inserts a set of punch cards into the machine. The loom reads them. He watches as the shuttle moves on its own, lifting and lowering the correct threads. Before his eyes, a complex pattern emerges in the silk, woven not by human hands, but by a machine following instructions encoded in the cards. His heart pounds. He has done it. A loom that threatens a way of life. Joseph is ecstatic. He believes his invention will be celebrated as a miracle, a gift to weavers, freeing them from the back-breaking work that has enslaved them for centuries. But when he brings his loom to the public, he is met with fear and hostility. The weavers of Lyon do not see this as a blessing. They see a death sentence. If machines can weave without them, what will happen to their families? For generations, weaving has been a sacred craft, passed from father to son. It is not just their livelihood, it is their identity. Now, in front of them, stands a machine that threatens to make them obsolete. Fear turns to anger. The weavers revolt. The loom must die. The first time Joseph demonstrates his loom in public, the reaction is violent. Angry crowds gather. They do not see progress. They see destruction. Weavers shout, curse, demand that he stop. They claim his invention will destroy jobs, ruin families, take food from their children's mouths. Before Joseph can react, they storm his workshop. They rip apart his loom, smashing its gears, tearing the punched cards, burning the wooden frame. Years of work, destroyed in moments. Joseph is devastated. But deep inside, he knows this is not the end. His idea is too powerful to be erased. No matter how much they resist, progress cannot be stopped. And soon, even the weavers of Lyon will realize it. Chapter 5: A Fight Against Resistance. Unveiling the Future, facing the past. Joseph Marie Jacquard stands in the center of Lyon's silk-weaving district, a place where the air is thick with the scent of oil and damp fibers. His hands rest on the edge of his invention, a loom unlike any the world has ever seen. He should feel proud. For years, he has labored, endured setbacks, watched his work burn to ash by angry mobs. But he rebuilt, refined, perfected the mechanism. Now, in front of a crowd of master weavers, he is ready to reveal his creation once more. The demonstration begins. The shuttle glides effortlessly. The punch cards move in perfect rhythm, controlling the threads like an invisible hand. And before their eyes, a silk tapestry, intricate, flawless, impossibly detailed, begins to emerge. There is no mistake. This machine works. It can do in hours what once took weeks. But as Jacquard looks up, expecting to see awe, he finds something else in the eyes of the weavers: fear. A murmur spreads through the crowd. The whispers turn into shouts. This is the end of us. He's stealing our work. A traitor to the guild. Then, the chaos erupts. The weavers revolt. The first blow comes from an old man, a master weaver whose hands are scarred from decades of labor. He lunges at Jacquard, grabbing his collar, shaking him violently. "We starve, and you build machines to replace us," he spits, his voice raw with betrayal. Others join in. A young apprentice, barely 16, throws a rock, shattering a part of the loom's frame. Another man rushes forward, tearing the punched cards apart, scattering them like dead leaves. Then someone shouts the words that turn a protest into a riot. "Destroy the devil's machine." The workshop erupts into violence. Weavers grab axes and hammers, smashing gears, breaking wooden supports, tearing Jacquard's life's work to pieces. In the chaos, Joseph is dragged into the street. He barely hears the words being hurled at him: a murderer, thief, betrayer. As fists strike his face, boots hit his ribs. Blood fills his mouth. He is thrown to the ground, and for a moment, he wonders if this is how it ends. Then, through the ringing in his ears, he hears a new sound. Drums. Soldiers. The Emperor summons. The riot stops abruptly as a squad of French soldiers pushes through the crowd. The weavers back away, breathing hard, their rage simmering just beneath the surface. A messenger steps forward, his uniform crisp, his voice clear. "Joseph Marie Jacquard, you are ordered to appear before Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte." Silence. Napoleon. The very name freezes the air. The soldiers do not wait for an answer. Jacquard, battered and bleeding, is hauled to his feet and taken away. A meeting with power. Days later, Jacquard stands in a vast chamber in the Tuileries Palace. The grandeur is overwhelming: golden chandeliers, polished marble floors, the scent of fine wine and power hanging in the air. And at the far end of the room, seated behind a massive desk, is Napoleon Bonaparte. The emperor does not waste time. "I have heard of your machine," he says. His piercing gaze locks onto Jacquard. "Show me." Despite the pain in his body, Joseph does as he is told. With trembling hands, he places a piece of fabric before the emperor, one woven on his automated loom. The design is flawless, a tapestry of Napoleon himself, woven thread by thread with mathematical precision. Napoleon leans forward. He runs his fingers over the silk, feeling the smoothness, the richness, the perfection. Then he smiles. This, he declares, will change France. Napoleon rises, walking around the table. The English have their factories, he says. They mass-produce cotton, making their fortunes. But silk? That is ours. And this machine, this miracle, will make us untouchable in the textile trade. He turns to one of his officers. Issue a decree. All silk weaving workshops in France will use the Jacquard loom, whether the workers like it or not. Jacquard's heart stops. The emperor has just sealed his victory. Or has he? Victory at a cost. Word spreads faster than wildfire. Under Napoleon's decree, every silk workshop in Lyon and beyond is forced to adopt Jacquard's loom. Those who resist are punished, their guilds dismantled, their livelihoods crushed under the weight of imperial law. The machine spreads across France, then England, then all of Europe. Silk production soars. Fabric that once took months to weave is now produced in days. Prices plummet. More people can afford fine clothing, luxurious upholstery, grand tapestries. And yet, as Jacquard walks through his own city, he sees the consequences of his work. The workshops are no longer filled with the sound of skilled hands at the loom. Instead, there is the relentless clatter of machines, punch cards clicking into place, mechanized hands replacing human ones. The very people he sought to help, the weavers, his own kind, curse his name. The weight of progress. Jacquard has won. His name will go down in history. His machine will transform industry, pave the way for automation, and even lay the foundation for early computing. But as he watches an old weaver, a man who once stood against him, sit by a river, hands idle, eyes hollow, Jacquard realizes something else. Progress is never without pain. The machine has freed many, but it has also displaced those who once relied on the old ways. His vision was not wrong. The world has changed for the better. But at what cost? And that is the question that will haunt him for the rest of his life. Chapter 6: The Legacy Beyond Silk. A genius without wealth. For all his achievements, Joseph Marie Jacquard does not die a rich man. His invention, the loom that revolutionized the textile industry, spreads across France, then Europe, then the world. Yet, unlike inventors who profit from their creations, Jacquard receives no fortune. Why? Because the French government claims his loom as public property. In one swift decree, his invention is made free for all to use. The state awards him a modest pension, barely enough to live comfortably. But Joseph does not fight it. He has never been a man driven by wealth. His life has been one of struggle, his father's broken hands, his mother's early death, the riots, the betrayals. He never wanted riches, he only wanted to solve a problem. And now, as he walks through the streets of Lyon, he sees the fruit of his labor. Silk, once a luxury reserved for kings and nobility, is now within reach of merchants, craftsmen, even the rising middle class. Fabrics with patterns of unimaginable complexity decorate homes, theaters, and palaces across Europe. The world has changed. But Jacquard does not yet realize just how deep his impact will go. a machine that crosses borders. By the 1820s, Jacquard's loom spreads beyond France. In England, industrialists adapted to their growing textile mills, mass-producing patterned fabrics for export. In Italy, silk makers in Florence and Venice adopt the system, breathing new life into centuries-old weaving traditions. Even in India and China, traders bring the technology, integrating it into their own textile industries. Jacquard's loom becomes a global force, reshaping economies, making textiles more affordable, and laying the foundation for the modern fashion industry. But his true legacy is not in silk. It is in something far greater. Something he could never have imagined. A young mathematician in London. In 1834, across the English Channel, a young British mathematician named Charles Babbage is working on an ambitious idea. He envisions a machine, a mechanical device capable of performing complex calculations automatically. A device that, in theory, could store information and process data. But he faces a problem. How can such a machine be programmed? How can it be given instructions? Then, one day, Babbage encounters the Jacquard loom. He studies its punch card system, the way each hole in a card corresponds to a specific action in the loom. And suddenly, he sees the answer. If Jacquard's loom can weave fabric based on instructions stored in punch cards, why couldn't a machine use the same system to perform mathematical calculations? Inspired, Babbage designs what he calls the analytical engine, a machine that, for the first time in history, introduces the concept of programmable computing. It is never fully built in his lifetime. The technology does not yet exist to create such a machine. But the idea is born. And it all began with a loom in Lyon. The bridge to modern computing. Jacquard does not live to see what his invention sets in motion. But his punch card system becomes the backbone of computing. In the 1890s, American inventor Herman Hollerith uses punch cards to store and process data for the U.S. Census. In the early 1900s, businesses worldwide use punch cards in early tabulating machines. By the 1940s and 1950s, companies like IBM develop massive computers, many of which still rely on punch cards to store and process information. The same principle that once told a loom which threads to lift and lower now tells machines how to calculate, analyze, and even think. The immortality of an idea. Jacquard's loom was never just about silk. It was about automation, precision, and the power of programming. He did not set out to create computing, but his idea, a machine that could follow instructions stored on a card, became the seed of a revolution. His name, once cursed by angry weavers, is now etched in history. Today, when we look at modern computers, artificial intelligence, and the world of automated technology, we can trace their origins back to a single invention by a poor boy from Lyon. A boy who watched his father's hand suffer at the loom. A boy who refused to accept that things had to stay the same. A boy whose machine changed not just an industry, but the world itself. And that is the true legacy of Joseph Marie Jacquard. Chapter 7, The Weaver's Immortality. The final years. It is 1834, and Joseph Marie Jacquard takes his final breath in his hometown of Lyon. He is 82 years old, a man who has witnessed the rise and fall of revolutions, the transformation of an industry, and the machine he created spreading across Europe and beyond. But in his final days, he remains unaware of the full magnitude of his legacy. He does not know that his invention will become the foundation of modern computing. He does not know that his name will be immortalized, not just in history books, but in the very machines that will define the future. He was simply a weaver's son, born into hardship, mocked, resisted, and threatened. But he was also a visionary, a man whose mind refused to accept the limits imposed by tradition. And because of that, he changed the world. The threads of his influence. 1. The textile revolution. Even before Jacquard's death, his loom had already transformed the textile industry. By the 1830s, thousands of Jacquard looms operate in Lyon alone. Across England, Italy, Germany, and the Americas, textile mills adopt his system, producing fabrics faster, cheaper, and with unmatched precision. Patterns that once took months to weave by hand are now created in days. The price of silk drops, making luxurious fabrics available beyond the aristocracy, allowing a new middle class to indulge in materials that once belonged only to kings and queens. Every pattern textile, from curtains to clothing, from upholstery to decorative wall hangings, now carries Jacquard's invisible signature. Today, in museums and historic homes, when we admire intricate woven fabrics from the 19th century, we are often looking at the work of a Jacquard loom. 2. The birth of computer programming. But Jacquard's impact goes far beyond textiles. The real shockwave of his genius is felt a century later, not in weaving factories, but in the world of computing. In 1834, Charles Babbage, the British mathematician, adapts Jacquard's punch card system for his analytical engine, the first design for a programmable computer. In 1843, Ada Lovelace, the first ever computer programmer, writes about using punch cards to create complex calculations, inspired directly by Jacquard's loom. In 1890, Herman Hollerith, an American inventor, applies the same punch card concept to store and process data for the U.S. Census, creating the first mechanized data processing system. But it doesn't stop there. In the early 20th century, punch card machines are used to manage banking records, payrolls, and industrial data. In World War II, computing machines based on punch card technology helped crack enemy codes, giving the Allies a crucial advantage. In the 1950s and 1960s, the first generation of IBM computers still rely on punch cards, carrying Jacquard's system into the digital age. Jacquard never set out to revolutionize computation. Yet his loom, the humble machine that once wove silk, had provided the first blueprint for automation, data storage, and programming. 3. The immortality of an idea. Jacquard dies without fame or fortune, but history does not forget him. By the late 19th century, statues of him rise in Lyon and Paris. His name becomes synonymous with precision weaving. In 1887, the Eiffel Tower is built, and on its base, the names of 72 French scientists and inventors are engraved into the iron. Among them is Joseph Marie Jacquard, his contribution ranked alongside the greatest minds of France. Even today, the term Jacquard remains a part of our language. Jacquard fabrics still dominate high fashion and luxury textiles. Jacquard weaving techniques remain essential in industries worldwide. And beyond fabric, his greatest invention, the concept of stored program automation, continues to shape the world. Every time we type on a computer, every time we interact with software written in code, we are, in a way, still pulling the threads of Jacquard's loom. One man can change the world. Jacquard's story is more than the tale of an inventor. It is a lesson in perseverance. It is a reminder that resistance always meets progress. It is proof that ideas, no matter how small or impossible they seem, can reshape history. He did not wield power. He did not lead armies. But he changed the world, not by force, but by innovation. And that is why Joseph Marie Jacquard is immortal.